major component of depth in our operations.
And when you guys are moving like the manipulator arm, you do have an option for like a feedback or resistance setting, is that right? But
There is, but we don't use it. I'm not really sure why, because ever since I've been here, we haven't used it. So, but I think sometimes it's maybe not as entirely accurate, or it's actually just better to use your visual feedback. Using the screens and your cameras, different angles. Yeah.
I've heard also some pilots say that there's an urge to fight it. Like you feel some resistance, you're like, oh, I can push through that, but you know, versus if you were just watching it and you saw that you were caught on something, you would.
Yeah, one of the big feedbacks is if you're
careful
grabbing something or pushing something, if you see the vehicle move, then you know you're applying a little too much pressure.
cool, thank you. Welcome back to Beth.
Hey,
How
did
was
I
your
miss anything amazing?
Steve was trying to name the seafloor after himself.
The seafloor. Okay, that was a little bit misconstrued.
Steve's floor.
Steve's floor.
Steve's floor.
I like it.
Jake had a pretty good pun.
Rebranding as the Steve floor.
It was okay. Thanks to everyone tunicating in.
That's pretty good now.
Well done, well done.
So things have deteriorated since you left, Beth.
All right. I missed whether Jess chimed in with a book or a movie. Did you?
I did. I chimed in with The Mummy as my
Oh,
my
I like it.
go-to inspiration for adventure and exploration.
And hilarity.
And hilarity as well. Amazing
And Brendan
movie.
Fraser.
Yes,
All of the above.
that's great. All right, 2,200 meters.
Beth, what was the best question you got in your interaction?
What was the best question? Let's see. We got questions about, we got actually a cool question about sharks, whether we've seen sharks out here. So we got to show some examples of the white-tipped sharks that often photobomb our recoveries. We got a question about what is the most surprising thing that you've seen, which isn't necessarily, that's a pretty standard question, but it's always fun to answer. So from Aphrodita's perspective, who was joining the call, as an educator who has never been to sea before, just relaying what it's like, all the surprises of being out here. And I shared kind of the unexpected thing that happened on our dive several days ago, where we came across that fossilized beaked whale bone. That was definitely a surprise for me. I wasn't expecting that. So yeah, it's just fun to share those perspectives. And we also got a question about, you know, what is the biggest adjustment you have to make to being on sea, you know, going into a 24-hour shifts and all those kinds of things. 24-hour operations, not 24-hour shifts. Oh gosh, that would be awful. But I shared that one of the hardest things that's going to be for going back to land is that in the camera view, I'm seeing all of them with their masks on. And so I was reminded that that's going to be our future in about a week, returning to that. I've gotten used to our bubble here where we can be mask free.
Yeah. a well-earned bubble. We did spend a week at sea with masks on.
Yeah, we did, in close quarters.
Testing.
And being very careful before we got on board, and lots of testing.
Yeah, that's right. Man, that feels like a long time ago that we were celebrating taking the masks off.
Yeah, exactly. It was really only a week ago.
Only a week.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. How many people do we have tuned in with us right now?
We have a lot here on Nautilus Live, over 130.
Oh, wow.
Different unique, and that's just the viewings. We don't know how many folks are viewing on one
That's right.
source.
Yeah.
But then, several hundred over on YouTube channel as well. So this is a fun time of day to see lots of people awake in North America, folks staying up late in Europe, people waking up over in Asia and Australia and New Zealand, and then quite a few viewers from from Hawaii.
Yeah, aloha. Thanks for joining us. We'll be in the blue water for at least 2 more hours of recovery from this very deep depth. And then the next dive will be starting up around 4 p.m. Hawaii time. So what is that? That's 6 p.m. on the Pacific coast of the U.S. and 9 p.m. on the U.S. East Coast. And you can adjust accordingly for the other time zones that you're tuning in from. And we'll be diving again on near the Tamana Seamount, I think on a feature that's to the southeast of that seamount. Try to figure out if that's part of the same ancient volcano or something different.
Yeah, so Beth, there was a question. I'm trying to find it. It was a while when you were in the interaction here.
Yeah.
I think this, so a student in the UK is writing about the Clipperton fracture zone. Hopefully they're still listening, I don't know. But wondering if you would be willing to share your opinions or thoughts on deep sea mining and spaces that would otherwise be valuable for research.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for that question. In your mind's eye, if you can, or if you have a map feature available to you, if you look in the Pacific Ocean between the U.S. West Coast and Hawaii, just to kind of the south of that trajectory, between kind of southern Hawaii and over towards Mexico, is an area called the Clarion-Clipperton Fracture Zone. It's basically a space of the seafloor that's under a relatively nutrient-poor part of the ocean, so there's not a lot of plankton and stuff in the water column, really low sedimentation rates. And when you go to the seafloor in that area, and there's abyssal plains, there's some abyssal hills, also some larger structures within those two fractures, the Clarion Fracture Zone and Clipperton Fracture Zone. And on the seafloor in those areas are relatively high concentrations of what are called manganese nodules. We've seen examples of those nodules on our dives here. If you've been watching with us on this expedition series, you may have seen areas where there's these kind of distributions of little, half-inch to inch size cobbles on the seafloor in areas that are kind of a sediment depression. And those are kind of smaller representatives of what's found in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. So there's places where, and the same formation processes, where you have metals and minerals from the seawater that are precipitating onto surfaces. They could be rocks, they could be conglomerations of sand, they could be shark's teeth, they could be all kinds of things that are exposed to the water for long, long periods of time, hundreds of thousands of years or so, that allow these mineral crusts to build up. So if you go down to the seafloor in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, you'll find lots of these nodules, and they're about the size of a potato, about the size of your fist, kind of uniformly distributed in different parts of the seafloor. And what's attractive to those, from those who think about potential resources in the seafloor, is that those manganese crusts, those black crusts that form on the nodules, can also co-precipitate other metals that have high economic value. Things like cobalt, rare earth elements, etc. And they can be concentrated in some cases, in high enough densities for them to be considered like ores, like you would find on land. And so because of consumer demand for electronics that need more and more metals, like lithium-ion batteries need lots of metal alloy components. Solar panels have rare earth elements in them, etc. So because there's increasing demand for transitioning from a fossil-free future to alternative energy sources that require more of these metals, more electric vehicles on the road, things like that. It's driving the price for these metals up to a level that there is a potential economic interest and use it to try to collect those metals from the seafloor in addition to or in lieu of trying to get them on land. And so so the Clarion-Clipperton zone, coming back to that spot, is an area that's of interest right now because it is thought to have a relatively high concentration of these nodules that may have relatively high concentrations of these metals. And so there's a governing body called the International Seabed Authority. That's part of the whole UN network of organizations that has a remit to manage mineral resources of the seafloor for the benefit, the common benefit of all mankind. And so they have leased areas of the seafloor in these international waters between kind of the southeast of Hawaii and over towards Mexico to a variety of different sponsoring states and contractors to explore those areas to see if they are of mineable value. And that has now triggered a lot of research, scientific research into that area as well, both funded by national agencies, foundations, or in partnership with some of these companies and contractors to understand the biological diversity and the ecosystem function of these environments, because we actually know very little about the what animals live down there, what their dispersal patterns are, to understand that if you mined in one area, would it potentially harm the ecosystem? Could the ecosystem respond? The mining process would essentially look like kind of like a really large SUV kind of vacuum cleaner in a way, trying to pull these nodules off the seafloor, crush them up, send them up to a support ship to gather the rock material and then send a dewatering plume back to the seafloor. So there's a lot of interest in trying to understand what the mining itself, like the sediment plume that would be created and how that sediment transport might impact organisms, as well as the dewatering plume, how would that distribution of sediment in the water column affect communities? I would say it's happening at a relatively accelerated rate right now. There are really active discussions going on within the International Seabed Authority about what the mining code could look like for mining these resources in international waters, what should be the guidelines for doing environmental impact assessments. So there's really a lot going on right now. There's some great resources online if people are interested in learning more about this. One place I direct people to is the Deep Sea Mining Observer. Tries to keep track of kind of the latest developments with little news articles and editorials. That's one good place. The Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative is also a place for experts to provide opinion to these governing bodies like the International Seabed Authority. And so that's another place to kind of get your finger on the pulse of what's going on. So within the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, there's a working group specifically on marine minerals that is trying to provide scientific input about what we know, what we don't know, what we need to prioritize understanding, and to provide expert opinion as those processes are being developed. So yeah, it's a really great question, and it's a very motivating part for the work that I'm doing in trying to understand these ecosystems.
Thank you so much. I think you were the perfect person to answer that question, Beth. I just learned so much. I learned, and I did not know before this cruise very much about ferromanganese nodules, and it's been an interesting theme of our watches to kind of see where those end up and where they don't end up and kind of what conditions seem to favor their formation. Was there anything surprising for you about seeing those on any of our seamount dives the last few days, weeks?
Yeah, I would say that I kind of came out here with this mindset that our only sighting of manganese nodules, these like nodule small pieces, would be on kind of the seafloor at the base of the seamounts. And so I didn't think we'd really see them very much because we weren't going to be diving on those abyssal areas because they're quite deep, deeper than the Hercules can go. And that the seamounts would be more of the extrusive basalts, the sheet flows, the carbonate caps. So I wasn't necessarily anticipating that we would find these little pockets of sediment depressions on these seamounts where these manganese nodules have the right conditions to form. So enough current to be keeping them relatively sediment free, and those kinds of things. So I wasn't quite prepared for seeing both of those resource types on the seafloor right next to each other. So that was kind of a surprise for me.
Cool. Always new stuff to learn. Love it.
I don't know, Steve, do you have anything else you want to add to this conversation about nodules and potential mining?
It's not, I don't have, it's not really something that I've included in my research so far, but it is something that we're aware of working in seamount environments. One of the questions I've had and have been trying to find ways to better measure this is where high-density deep-water coral communities and sponge communities occur relative to areas that might be, commercially exploitable by deep-sea crust mining on seamounts, which is a little bit different process than nodule harvesting. And I think it's a difficult question to answer, in part because other than picking up rocks from the seafloor, we don't really have a good handle on, where, if coral communities, which usually occur on, large grain-sized substrates like boulders and sometimes pavements, if we can't really understand, what the crust accumulation conditions are under those communities by picking up rocks, we'll never really know what that environment is like for them. And then Beth actually raised a good point in previous talks I've heard her give about whether these crust communities on seamounts might have some sort of microbial cues or microbial community that is beneficial, or that is helps corals find areas that are good to settle on because they I don't know, they have some sort of
releasing like a chemical cue into the water, like this is where it's nice
cue
and
tracking
rocky. Please land here.
Yep. Yeah. So those are all like open questions right now that I think are very poignant for the research that I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that's been guiding my the sample collection that I've been requesting on this expedition is, and some of the seamounts we've been exploring different ridges to try to understand how the animal communities vary. And we've, for instance, on Don Quixote Seamount, we saw really stark differences between the abundance of animals on one part of the seamount versus another part of the seamount. And so part of my research will be, are the rocks underlying those environments substantially different? And the mineral contents, the metal contents of those rocks are significantly different, to then inform how an organization would manage an ecosystem in terms of where there are high animals that you really don't want to perturb, where are spaces that have similar conditions in the rocks, but have different animal compositions. Which is not to say that these seamounts would ever be mined, right? They're within a monument.
Yep. But they're good controls.
They're good controls and baselines for understanding.
Yeah, comparisons, yeah, which is critical to evaluating impacts for these types of processes in the future.
Right. And some of the seamounts we are visiting are outside the monument, but ostensibly have similar formation conditions. So even though it would be important to know, like, what might be the conditions outside the monument, which are in international waters.
I want to open it up to the front row if anyone has thoughts. I don't know if you're still troubleshooting something up there.
I've just been following up with, there's like, seems to be a lot of current event talks and articles about this subject, so I've just been kind of reading along, and it's interesting just understanding, the long-term effects of, for example, there's oftentimes little pretty graphics about what the mining would look like, but understanding, how destructive it is and also seeing the long-term effects of that kind of massive sediment plume in the water is certainly something to understand before delving deep into it.
Right.
The plume dynamics is something that's really fascinating because a lot of these deep abyssal sediments are extremely fine-grained particles.
Yeah.
And they
Clays.
for seriously hundreds of years to fall back down to the seafloor. Depending on the size of their diameter. So it's not a trivial process when you start talking about plume, and tailings disposal.
Right.
Right, and kind of.
And the original question was specifically about the Clarion-Clipperton zone, and that's just because that's an area that's really gotten a lot of focused attention. There are other parts of the seafloor that are also leased for exploration for potential mining. But for me, one of the things I like to think about to help ground the potential impact is that if you were to, again, look at kind of a global scale map, that region that's called the Clarion-Clipperton zone, in aerial extent, if you were to superimpose that on the continental United States, it's almost the same width. So it's a very, very large part of the seafloor that is being considered for this kind of activity. It wouldn't be that we would mine that whole area. Every exploration contract would only be able to mine a fraction of that space. But in terms of thinking about the potential long-range impacts, that's something that I try to think about. It's not just, the scale of a seamount. It's the scale of a very, very large area of the seafloor. So the ability to think thoughtfully about if we choose to do this, if humanity chooses to do this and gives the social contract to do this kind of work, to understand what those impacts are.
Could you repeat, for folks listening at home, and interested in learning more, you gave a couple of resources early on in this conversation. Could you say again kind of where folks can go to learn more about what the considerations are and where to voice thoughts, if possible?
Yeah, so there's been kind of a good place to get kind of an entry-level overview of this topic. The Guardian has actually had several articles in the last few months on this issue of what is deep sea mining and kind of what are the stakes, who's interested, what are the latest developments.
That was a good series, if I remember.
Yeah, so there's been several articles that were published in the Guardian over the last few months that I think are really great resources to kind of get started. There are there's another kind of news blog online called the Deep Sea Mining Observer, or DSM Observer, that also tries to look out into the marine technology space and the science space and the policy space and aggregate that information. And so I find that to be a helpful resource to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of, what's happening in the policy world in this environment, what's happening in terms of building the new prototypes for doing this exploration work? What are the latest news about what we're learning scientifically about these environments? And then there's a non-governmental organization called the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, which is a community of experts, policy, science, et cetera, legal, who provide expert opinion to the governing bodies that are working in the ocean space. One of the working groups of the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, or DOSI, is the Minerals Working Group. And so on the DOSI website, there's the Minerals Working Group page where you can kind of see the latest and greatest, the technical documents, the advisory comments that the experts have provided to these technical communities like the International Seabed Authority. So those are good places to get started. If you're a scientist who's tuning in, another community of practice could be found within the Deep Sea Biology Society, which is another scientific society that isn't just focused on this topic, but more about understanding deep sea biology. And so that's obviously a good group to engage with this conversation in terms of bringing expertise of where animals are found and why and what are the conditions and kind of what are the gaps in our knowledge. So those are some of the resources I would suggest. And if you have more questions, find my contact information on the Nautilus Live page and send me an email. I'm more than happy to engage on this topic if people are interested.
Thank you. We do have one follow-up question here.
Okay.
Kind of on point. So do you think there's a chance that the mining restrictions could extend to ensuring that the sediment plume is far enough away from prevailing currents that ensures they don't end up sending mining sediment halfway around the world?
That's a really good question. I don't have a good answer to, you know, because it's actively being discussed and those studies of plume dynamics are still going on. You know, and a lot of this work was delayed because of COVID. So there were several kind of exploration prototype studies that were supposed to happen in 2019, 2020, 2021 that have been delayed or are just now starting again. And all of them are kind of having to adjust to the whether or not they can bring the full scientific team because of COVID and all those things. So some of these really high priority studies have been delayed, and our understanding is therefore also delayed. And that's happening in parallel with the conversations that are happening in the International Seabed Authority about trying to set rules based on best available knowledge. And so, you know, it's not necessarily like we'll find the answer and then make the decision. Sometimes we have to, there's a desire to make the decision before all the information that you might want is available. And so then how do you build into the code flexibility to respond to new information in the future, which carries all kinds of legal ramifications for changing the landscape after you already have a contract. So, you know, it's a tricky question to answer.
Thank you so much for that context. Thanks for your questions out there. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sticking with us. We're 120 active users here on nautiluslive.org. We are ascending back through the blue water to the surface. We're at about 1,800 meters.
Yeah. Keep sending the questions because that allowed 400 meters of ascent to pass before I even realized it. So
yeah, about just 2 hours to the surface.
Yeah, 2 more hours to go of blue water Zen.
Question for Jess. Are you able to take a question?
Yeah, sure thing.
Are there any left-handed ROV pilots? It seems like the manipulator arm was designed for righties.
Oh, that's a cool question. I don't know.
Isn't Trevor a southpaw?
I can't recall.
Is he a what?
Isn't Trevor left-handed?
I don't know.
I think I've seen him riding left-handed. Wouldn't swear to that. I could be completely wrong, but I want to say that he is.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I think I'm remembering someone sitting there and struggling with the orientation of the box, the control. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Seemed like it was possible to overcome that.
Yeah. Just have to swap out 2 consoles, maybe. That would be the thing to do.
Yeah.
On the craft controller, so the controller that we have that we can put in our lap, it's usually called like the master controller. You're right, so the orientation of the kind of the mini version of the craft is on the right side, but there is an option to put it on the left. You just have to move around a couple bits. Yeah, no, I don't know of many that are left-handed though.
Good question.
Some subs have a left or 2 manipulators.
Yeah.
That are similar to the multifunction ones that we have on the right. And I guess it would be advantageous if you're using the left one to be left-handed.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Are there any manipulator controls that are like on your hand gloves?
Haptic gloves. Oh, that'd be
The
so
Nintendo
cool.
Power Glove.
Yeah, like those kinds. Are they always joystick and button?
I only know joystick ones.
There's a lab at the University of Rhode Island that's doing, I think they do have something like that. It's a glove, and
You're really quiet, Jake.
at the University of Rhode Island, I'm pretty sure there's a lab, and they have, it's, yeah, like what you're describing, a glove.
Yeah.
And it has like some sort of
Haptic feedback.
grip sensors on it or something.
I guess it would have to be like a whole sleeve, right? Because you need like the shoulder and the elbow and the wrist.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, be in the control van doing the robot.
I wonder how indexing that would work. You like
Yeah.
freeze your hand,
Oh yeah, press a button.
index,
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
in a different orientation.
There's definitely some unique sampling tools.
Right, and like the manipulator function where you can just like spin in a circle. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah.
To break your wrist.
Gesture, some sort of hand gesture.
Yeah.
The control that Jess was talking about, it's a miniature version of the arm. For what I understand, this manufacturer and others, there's another control that you can purchase instead, and it's much larger. It's closer. It's between the size of that controller and the arm itself. You actually have to like. I've seen pictures of it. I'm not making this up. And some of the older ROV pilots talk about it. It's a giant thing that you have to manipulate. Seems like they would. Yeah, we should make that smaller.
You have to become the arm.
Yeah, you are. You step into the arm suit and just.
Iron Man.
Yeah.
Are there any video games that exist that accurately reflect ROV piloting?
Not Mario Kart.
There's a pretty good flight simulator video game, but I don't know if there's anything underwater.
I think, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I don't know. You can go, Steve.
No, I was just thinking Tetris and how I fit weird shapes into other weird shapes.
Oh,
Yeah, it's a great
that's
one.
a good one.
It's mostly just problem solving.
Although the other ROVs that we have on board, one of them actually uses an Xbox controller to fly.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have seen that.
Little Herc uses an actual Xbox controller. So that big box, if you look on SAT-3, the big box is sitting in front of Jess there. That's all replaced by an Xbox controller.
Is that the only way, or is there an alternate control?
I think that's how it's set up.
Yeah, I don't ever recall seeing
Yeah,
it with another
Ross.
controller.
Oh gosh, lots of related questions here. Is there any interest in creating a VR controls for ROVs? Or would
I
that
think some people are doing it, but whether or not there's interest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we did the technology dives back in late September, one of the things that they were doing with NUI was setting it down, taking, from what I can remember and understand, taking a fairly quick photo of that, rendering that, And then that allowed the scientists on shore, instead of actually directly manipulating the arm, they could basically say, okay, arm, go to this position. And so they weren't limited by the delay in the video, because that was substantial. By the time it was off of Nui to Argus, up to us, up to the satellite, back down, it was significant. It's like, oh, I moved the arm, and then you'd hear the Jeopardy music playing, and eventually the arm would move. So this allowed the scientist on shore to actually see what was in front of him, and even if it moved, he was still looking at what was there. It was pretty cool.
I like that solution to that problem, is mapping it out. And
one. Oh, sorry, Rennie, go ahead.
no, that's all.
The other day on another dive, I was talking about also there are some ROVs that have stereo cameras that allow you to see in 3D if you're wearing 3D glasses, which I kind of think of as almost like VR, right, in terms of like feeling like you're there. But one of the things that I noticed when we were using that technology is that because you're on a rocking boat, which is not what is happening on the screen in front of you, it causes incredible like inertia vertigo. So that is something, at least for the on-ship experience, that I think would make virtual reality a bit tricky. But having that technology on so that people from shore can experience it might be advantageous.
For my master's thesis, I worked with LiDAR, and I had some models of the rock glaciers I was working on, and as a gift, a friend of mine who was in computer vision took my data and created a VR world where I could shoot tennis balls at it in frustration. But it was a very early version of Oculus Rift, and I put it on, and it did not take very long for me to get
I wish I could shoot tennis balls at my master's thesis.
Yeah, it was great. But yeah, they didn't quite hone it in yet, I don't think, because my brain couldn't process that.
Most brains. I did a lot of 3D when 3D video, 3D TV was starting to come out, and it was all the rage for about a year. We were converting trucks over to do 3D. We're shooting concerts in 3D. We shot tennis in 3D. And there's a lot of physical limitations, and our brains just are not wired for that kind of stimulus most of the time. There are people who can put it on, and they're fine. I would put a set of 3D glasses on to look at a shot, and 3 minutes later, it's like, get these things off my face because I've got a massive headache.
Yeah, it's kind of like Uncanny Valley, but for the environment.
Well, it's like now you can put on VR headset and you can sit like courtside at a basketball game or something. Which is like, that's pretty interesting. But it's like the same thing with the deep sea. Like you would put on a VR headset and you can, I don't know, see what the vehicle's seeing, feel like you're there, which is pretty interesting.
VR, the problem tends to be timing. If there's any propagation delay, your brain starts to go, wait a minute, this isn't happening in real time.
I turned my head already, and
with 3D, it had to do with the distance between your pupils. Everybody's distance between their pupils is slightly different, but in a 3D rig, we define that for you. So we've basically said, hey, you know, you've spent the last decade or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 with this pupillary distance. We're going to change that by a few millimeters. And, oh, man, that's a quick way for your brain to go, no, I've been looking at 3D this way for the last 5 decades. Now you want me to look at it 3 millimeters shorter? No. And we took a lot of 3D trucks and converted them back to regular trucks. I can't think of any 3D system that's still functioning.
2D trucks.
Yep, 2D trucks. Well, now it's all 4K and 8K.
Couldn't even get in them.
2D. Cute.
Open one door.
I can't get into the truck. I opened the door and fell out the other side.
Rennie, your comment about having this VR experience where you could shoot tennis balls at what you're seeing. I'm now, whenever we're doing dives where the lasers are on something, and in my mind I'm going pew, pew.
Yeah,
now I'm going to change it to like the
tennis ball.
The tennis ball sound. Perfect. That was a very good tennis ball sound.
Very good.
Random question. Anyone in the van can answer this. What's the diameter of our push core tubes?
2.5 inches.
2.5 inches. Okay.
That I think is the outer diameter.
Yeah. Okay.
1/8 inch wall thickness.
Yeah.
So you've got roughly 2 1/4 on the inside.
Appreciate it.
I only know this because I had to order those tubes recently.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. We have a bunch down in the hold, but have to do some calculations.
Yep. Yeah.
Jake and Jess, is there a particular certification to pilot an ROV or training course?
I never did anything.
It shows.
You're not certified.
Every now and then the International ROV Pilots Union shows up and asks for their license.
What?
I think that's to answer your question about, I think either Jake or I, we don't have any official certifications or anything like this.
Do those exist?
So to work in oil and gas is a different industry altogether. So for that, you have to keep very strict dive logs, and you keep your hours you should keep your hours in general, but you should, for there they have a different protocol and standards. And I think to operate in an oil and gas industry, you probably do have to go through some licensing or something like this.
Yeah.
Or
they have like their own tech training school, I think, or something like oceaneering, or like they partner with a certain tech school to do ROV training.
yeah.
The training course, isn't the MATE ROV, isn't that like is that just for building ROVs, or is that also for learning to manipulate them? Does anybody have any experience with MATE?
It's usually at sea.
Okay.
Internship.
Yeah.
Okay.
Often in.
They also do have like competitions in building.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was more
vehicles
familiar with.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of stuff just to get more interest in people in education to pursue fields and ROVs.
And there's a couple, like if you do some web searches for like do-it-yourself ROV kits, there's a couple ways that like anybody at their home with access to a pool or some body of water, you can build these little ROVs yourself out of PVC tubing and some airplane motors, things like that, and then make your own little joystick and put a camera on it and drive it around. So it'll at least give you the experience of how to trim your buoyancy and lateral and spin around and all those things.
We did that one year as an exhibit at the Philadelphia Science Festival. We set up a little dunk tank and had a little PVC ROV.
Yep.
And we had these little lanyards with ROV driver license.
In training? Yeah, okay.
In training.
Aww.
Jake can get you one of those if you want.
Love it. Yeah, we've done that at a pool too, where we set up like little obstacle courses and things for the ROVs to pick up.
No, Argus does not have training wheels.
I just go to Dave & Buster's or Chuck E. Cheese and practice on the claw.
There you go.
Everyone's favorite arcade game, The Winch.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the questions, though.
You can come down to the lab anytime you want. I have a tiny, tiny pair of forceps you can try and pick up very, very small grains of sand with.
Renato, do we use 3D models when planning dives?
We do. Let me see if I have that up before I overpromise.
Thanks for putting the winch cam up on channel 3 video.
Waiting to use that one.
Gotta give the winch some love. So
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we do use 3D models. Jeff,
what are you on, Ryan?
MB Proc.
I don't know if I have that in there. There we go.
So when we collect bathymetric data, we can represent it in 2 dimensions, but it does have a Z, a depth measurement, so we can also presented in 3D, and we have software that can show that. This is Fledermaus by QPS.
Roger that.
So these are, let me orient myself here. Where are we? There we go. So these are all the seamounts that we've been working with, mapping and diving on. You can see, so I'll just zoom in here on Don Quixote seamount, and here were 2 dives. You can see our descent and our ascent and our track along the bottom. It's a bit messy just because we're in the process of mapping and remapping and getting some ground covered, but for the seamount that we dove on today, where am I looking? Isn't it here? Where are the dive points? There they are. They're just hiding. This was our track, our planned track here on the western flank of the seamount. But yeah, it can be helpful in the planning. Surprisingly less useful during the dive, just because of the resolution, and we get such finer resolution with our onboard sensors and sonars and stuff and cameras that we can get an idea of the general trend in 2 dimension and just kind of navigate off of that. But when we are planning, yeah, we typically do use 3D. It's kind of nice to see the ridge structure and maybe the angle of approach that we want to use. Can be helpful also to exaggerate. So here we have, I can exaggerate this, so now this is 4.5 times. Sometimes it's often what these features feel like when you're down there is 3 times or something like that. You can see, because the scale of these features are so large, it's hard to kind of grasp when you're on the ground. So exaggerating it can be helpful, but.
Question for the navigator or anyone in the van. What is your favorite map projection?
Oh, like Mercator versus other?
Equal area.
Equal areas.
Equal area.
Yeah,
I don't know that one.
anything that preserves at least something. Yeah, so equal area is
Preserves the proportion of.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And any latitude.
Yeah.
So yeah, things are accurately.
More accurate than Mercator.
More accurately, yeah.
Yeah.
I had to use this strange projection that's used in Argentina, just based on the shape of Argentina. Oh man, it's gonna kill me now that I can't remember it. Gaucho and Chauspe or something like that.
I kind of like the map projections too that show the southern hemisphere as up.
Yeah.
Yeah, this kind of gives you a unique perspective of, yeah, just how much landmass is in the northern hemisphere.
Right. I also like the ones that that show the view from the poles, right? So the
Polar
view of the
stereographic,
Arctic
I think,
Ocean,
is one.
yeah, right? And that really, like a Mercator projection just makes the Arctic Ocean feel like it's like all over the place. But with that view, you see that's really this enclosed ocean with just a few inlets in and out.
Yeah.
This question reminds me of that XKCD comic. It says, like, what does your favorite map projection say about you?
Oh.
Is that a thing?
Allbear's equal area.
BuzzFeed quiz?
I want to.
It's a XKCD.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I would love that to be a
that.
BuzzFeed quiz.
We have a couple of those downstairs. One of which is poking fun at something we actually ended up doing. It was talking about mapping coastlines in real time, and like the sense of urgency, and it's making fun of it because it's kind of like a coastline. But when there was the Kilauea eruption, we had Nautilus nearby, and we're actually mapping the coastline as it changed.
How can you apply to volunteer? You want to volunteer after listening to this for?
Who wouldn't?
Yeah, no, please check out nautiluslive.org and you click on team. There's a whole portal. I believe right now there are still applicants for the high school internship in 2022. Those are very limited and the deadline is fast approaching. However, any open opportunities will be listed there on the nautiluslive.org website. There are opportunities for internships and everything from ROV, I don't know, what's your technical term? Engineering? Engineer, ROV, specialists, video engineering. We have data scientists, ocean scientists, science communication fellows. So lots of opportunities. I do think that some of those are going to be a little bit delayed. We've had a little bit of deferral happening over the last 18 months with a lot of the positions, but those will open up eventually. Definitely keep your eyes open. For those interested in getting involved, would love to have you at sea. Yeah, and if you have just kind of general or very specific interest in being involved, whether that's very technical or artistic or some of these other questions coming in, those are, I would definitely send something to info@oet.org, sorry, info@oceanexplorationtrust.org. Can definitely connect you with the right department of the Ocean Exploration Trust if there's any kind of connection and potential for collaboration there.
Well, everyone will be happy to know we're well past the halfway mark.
Woohoo!
So,
All right.
we have about 83 minutes left.
But who's counting? Yeah, and you definitely don't want to miss out because on several of our recoveries lately, we have been visited by a white-tip shark, photobombing Hercules camera. So
we've also seen a lot of squid in the last 50 meters, but are those typically at night? Have we?
I think they follow the lights at night.
yeah, we often those squid observances, I think, are in the nighttime. They're attracted by the lights of the ship. Although I noticed this morning when I came out that the back deck lights were off. So I'm wondering, I don't know if we're doing that for the squid. It might also be to disincentivize birds from coming towards the ship. We've got a couple.
Tired of cleaning off the decks?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of bird droppings that the crew is having to deal with. We have some boobies and other birds that have delighted in fishing around our vessel as we're moving. It's really cool to watch.
Yeah, they're amazing. Clement, can you like contextualize like where we are and why it's so incredible that these seabirds are like way out here?
Yes, do my best. I mean, starting from like the general like Papahanaumokuakea area.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So
it's not like we're like 10 miles from shore or anything.
Yeah, I didn't look at the map, but I'm pretty sure that we're very far off of the archipelago in terms of like Papahanaumokuakea itself, and I couldn't necessarily speak to the exact ranges of some of these birds, but speak to the exact range of some of these birds, but I'm pretty sure that they might have a range between like 30 to maybe like the maximum of 80 to 100 miles off of shore. And so I think that us as a ship out here is a very welcome sort of rest stop for them to sort of, not rest their wings, I guess, and then fuel up or like get ready to go off outwards. But generally speaking, we are in the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. This is a very a very important place culturally for Hawaiians and stuff like that, as we do trace our histories, genealogies to areas specifically within the monument, particularly the areas of like Kuehelani, and other places like other famed or historical place names like Komoku, Komoholi'i, and more well-known places in the like more towards the main Hawaiian islands such as Nihoa and Mokumanamana. In Hawaiian thinking broadly, we see these islands being born in succession, if you will. So the eldest of the islands being, of course, being around like Kiri Atoll, or what is known as Moku Papapa and Holaniku, and then the youngest, of course, being Hawaii Island. So if we look east to west, the Hawaiian thought on in terms of like it reflects like the Hawaiian view of like life. So life will start in the east in the youngest portion of the area where the sun rises, and will transition across, of course, and then return back to our well, basically to pass on to another realm, for lack of better terms. The name for Papahana Mokuakea honors two of our prominent deified ancestors or gods or elemental forms in a sense, if you will. So Papahana Moku, the first half of the name, actually refers to the personification of Mother Earth, and then Akea or Wakea basically being the sky father, if you will, or the broad domain expanse of the sky. And so this name sort of honor, it was devised by the Cultural Working Group in 2006, just after a few years after the monument was like designated and stuff like that. And it's reflective of not only our honoring our historical culture and stuff like that, but also our genealogical link. So Papa and Wakea are they're the parents of the Hawaiian Islands, and so first is born like Hawaii, then Maui, Oahu, the other islands in between, and Kauai, and then Niihau and Ko'olawe are two other islands that are also mentioned, along with Molokai and Lanai, of course. But then after the islands are born, we have the first kalo plant and stuff like that, or the first taro and stuff. And then after the taro or the kalo plant is born, the first Hawaiian person and stuff. And so throughout this story, it's representative of our direct genealogical connection to place through these ancestors of ours. Particularly where Papahana Mokuakea is in terms of geographical location, as well as within like as well as in Hawaiian thought. So like we said, right, as we move back towards like the realm of our ancestors in the northwest and stuff, that is very reflective of the birthing, and as well as returning to pole, or like like our primordial darkness and stuff like that. And so we also have like cosmogonic genealogies and chants that come from primordial darkness into creation, describe this entire genealogy, and ends with our with some of our our chiefly lineages. Yeah, so when we cross over, when we pass actually Moku Manamana and begin to rise above the Tropic of Cancer, or what is known as Kealapolihiwa Akane, we're literally moving outside of the physical limit of the sun, or like the realm of all or light, if you will, into pole. And so so Papahana Mokuakea basically represents this very cultural significant place of which our gods and ancestors reside. And so every chance that we get to move here, or we get to come and visit here, we have a chance to connect with those places and those entities and stuff. And then just the general lack of people or sustained communities up here at this time is also evident of that. And so there's not to say that there's a lack of abundance, or that there's a lack of historical and cultural reference and stuff like that. But these places where people do not necessarily reside actually tells us that these places are therefore more sacred, more important, and have so much more potential for us to reflect upon our origins and connections to these places. So, yeah.
Every time I hear you, it never gets old, and it's really, really beautiful, and just is such a reminder every time of what an honor and privilege it is to be here in this place that is not readily or easily accessible to much of the world, much less, yeah.
Yeah, and then I would also like to acknowledge too that I mean, I realize that we've had some time to develop over time, so develop the narrative, but the knowledge that has been passed on to me is not just my own. So I'd just like to acknowledge the Papahana Mokuakea, the monument, NOAA, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and specifically the Cultural Working Group, who were directly involved within prepping me for this expedition, as well as Nautilus. If anybody is interested in some of the scholarly work that was done up over there, Dr. Keku Awakikiloi did his dissertation in the Department of Anthropology, tracing the cultural historical importance of Papahana Mokuakea, but also studying the history of human interaction within these spaces as well. And so specifically in Niho and Mokumanamana, I believe, but those are the places that hold some of the highest concentration of like cultural sites, and they range in anything from sort of like house sites or maybe agriculture areas to very significant religious sites that have to do with the alignment of celestial bodies and therefore eclipse